All right. So thank you everyone so far for attending our Juneteenth conference. I am excited to introduce our next speaker, Nate Rose. He's going to come and talk to us about innovating our STEM education. This is a subject that for me personally, I'm deeply interested and excited to hear about. Um, and and Nate is deeply interested in this because it fosters ingenuity and creativity among all of our young students. Our speaker has worked his entire career with modern technology at various places in the US and in Italy. And he also supports nonprofits like AI4ALL and NSBE. So, without further ado, I want to introduce Nate Rose. Nate, thank you so much for being on our conference.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate this time, and I want to give like a fair forewarning just about my background. Hey everyone, I'm Nate Rose. I'm a software engineer at Ripple. I work on the data infrastructure team, and then I also do like concurrent graduate student work, focusing on research for neural engineering. And then I do this. Recently just got interested in nonprofit space. So I'm actually the technology board director at the NSBE Jr Bay Area. It's a lot. But there's overlap. So essentially, I'm interested in learning and how we learn from data to accelerate business, how we model machines to learn for predictive outcomes, how we model machine learnings to reflect our inspired complex brains, and then how we use that for building education systems to implement that learning. So just to start, hopefully everyone can see my screen about the contents of this presentation. There's a bunch to cover, and I'm hoping that the outcome with my lens as an engineer, I could shed light on two gaping holes in education. One is the deep-rooted biases in how we teach students and assess them. And the second thing is the ed tech space. Uh, so to start off, we want to start with like a working definition of what is intelligence. And we need something that could cover, Stephen Hawking, who had a motor neuron disease like ALS, but he was still able to be a lead researcher in theoretical physics, to a worm, right? A worm is able to survive and, excrete, reproduce. There's still tiers of intelligence in between. So I like to use this French sentence, which just means the intelligence is the ability to adapt. And for time purposes, we won't discuss the hereditary versus environmental implications of how intelligence is created or built, because it's highly controversial and it doesn't fit in the time constraints of what we're looking to do. So intelligence, when it comes to this idea of education, we have to think that education is actually a fairly new invention. Well, secular education is. So during the 19th century, France required children to attend school and get out of factories and stop working for 2 cents on the dollar. And that was due to the Jules Ferry laws that mandated all kids to attend school. So they needed a way to differentiate students who needed specific needs and be given remedial work in classrooms. So Alfred Binet, who used the sentence, the ability to adapt to define intelligence, created this thing that we all know as the IQ test, intelligent quotient test. And there's caveats with Alfred Binet. He's a French psychologist. He was also a hypnotist, which I guess was like the entrepreneur at the time. So he creates the IQ test and he uses this equation that's pretty interesting. It's just the mental age divided by the chronological age times 100. And inside the test, you can see examples of like pattern recognition and inhibition on how they assess the mental age of the student so that they can be placed in remedial classes in France. But then we get to weird turn in IQ. During the height of the 1900s, eugenics was also prospering. So IQ really takes an abusive left turn, and Carl Brigham, who's a professor at Stanford University here in California, leverages the IQ test for using and proven eugenics. So you can see the distinct differences in the initial test to here you can see the mammy caricature, even Eastern European caricatures, and one of the questions asking which one is prettier. And then here's the output of his book in 1923, Carl C. Brigham, of which cultures perform best during the IQ test, right? Here you can see individuals from England, and then here you can see Negro draft, right? And we can see that the IQ test just evolves over time. So though we're making, monumental breakthroughs inside the Black community and African American community, Saudi Tanner Mosel Alexander is the first African American woman to receive a PhD in the U.S. in economics from the University of Pennsylvania. Then Carl Brigham uses the modified Stanford Binet test to create the college admissions test at Princeton, which is later evolved into the Scholastic Aptitude Test, which is for the College Board that he creates. And we know that today as the SAT. Then in 1944, the GI Bill is passed, and in World War II, veterans are coming back home, and they needed a way to scale for veterans coming back home to look into enrolling into college and universities. And during that time, we have Brown versus Board here in the US, which is desegregation of education. We have in 1978, the University of California versus Bakke, which rules in favor of affirmative action. And we're making progresses, and I'm sure the SAT is evolving. But despite this, despite the admissions and entry, just last year in 2019, we can see that the U.S. college admissions was doing some sort of quid pro quo at certain universities where they were granted college entry based off of either payment or some sort of favor. And then here in 2020, due to COVID-19 and influences, UC schools, University of California schools, are actually suspending the requirement of the SAT. So this is almost 100 years to the date from when Carl Brigham made that initial IQ test. So the assessment of intelligence has a systemic flaw. And we've already identified that as an indicator, but it also plays to job opportunities and matriculation. So this great NCES, which is the National Center for Education Statistics, monitored the class of 2005 and showed that only 4% were able to graduate with a STEM degree, science, technology, engineering, and math, which you should beg the question, how many of them were women? How many of them were students of color? How many of them were later employed? So around the time that the 2005 high school class graduated, we're seeing the emergence of the tech industry and how that gets reflected. And if we double tap into one example of the tech industry, 17% of tech roles, and this is based off of 2016, 2015, for Google, only 17% are women, and Black and Latinx make up 3% of their technical workforce. So we need to address the leakage between K through 12 all the way to college. Elaine Seymour and Nancy Hewitt, they created this really great book called Why Undergraduates Leave. They're directors at the University of Colorado. And 90% of students during their study in 1997, they leave from concerns about teaching practices. So the norms and discourse of this scientific community are not really explicit for underrepresented minorities or first generation students. There needs to be some sort of cultural relevance, which is the key that they're finding in their studies for cognitive processing. So we need to start patching the pipeline earlier. And I actually volunteered at Raoul Wallenberg High School here in San Francisco. I volunteered teaching computer science. 2 out of 23 students were Latinx in the computer science class, and there were no Black students. And my character, I started asking some of the Black students in the hallway why they weren't in the computer science class. They were behind. They were ineligible. They had no interest, right? Even if they were. So it's happening earlier and earlier. And these are students in San Francisco, the quote Mecca of Silicon Valley. So how are we, if they're not even engaging here when it's so accessible, how do we expect them to really pursue STEM roles in the future? So there's some studies and research that's really being done now, which is 2019. New research in neuroscience and psychology is hoping to bridge the gap between this. So a professor at Harvard, his name is David Rose, he produced this universal design for learning, which really looks at, if we break it down, it's really just asking, can you see yourself in the curriculum? Is the displayed information optimized on the board or inside the sheets, the handouts, the worksheets? Is academic discourse correlated to learning rate? Were you exposed to the content for computer science in 5th grade when your parents signed you up for a computer science summer camp versus a student who's brand new to computer science starting from their freshman year in college? Which one is a metric of growth and opportunity to be successful in the course? How do we address barriers to equity? Some of the students have to go home and work because their household requires them to produce another stream of income to support them, and also provide structure that assures that the longevity persists. So there's a lot of work being done here in the nonprofit space because, to my opinion, the education system is really, really slow to addressing this issue. Can you see yourself in the education? Black Girls Code is directly addressing this. They're displaying using representation by Black and brown women to embed them and show Black girls that, hey, you can pursue a career in software development. There's the Interact project where they're looking to build design and UX skills with underrepresented minorities. Hidden Genius project is a really interesting one where they train talented students to be commissioned for software development work in their communities. So just imagine a Black and brown student saying, hey, my first job was building an app. I actually interacted with one of their students and he says he was making money managing a Shopify store. So this is kind of the new age of students and ensuring that they can leverage technology and virtualization for even income. I was a part of TEALS, which was founded by Microsoft, and they do computer science curriculum as Hack the Hood does as well. And then there's also this new one, AI4ALL, which we partner with, that does open learning for understanding concepts about artificial intelligence. But this is a lot, and for some parents, they don't know where to go, or we need some sort of aggregation to being able to surface this to parents. So I created my own, and I landed my first job at Microsoft 6 years ago through an organization called the National Society of Black Engineers. And it's sort of my conviction to continue to open doors, since it was a gateway for me to enter the tech industry. What we do here, we created our own nonprofit 501c3 where we aggregate these programs for modular learning, and we use a brand that the industry recognizes and a network that stems from like a college dorm room all the way to directors, VPs, presidents at engineering firms across the industry. So here you can see Destiny and Kylan. They're using 3D printing pens to draw when they should be, I think they were supposed to be building parts for a drone. Here you can see Amir, and we started this less than a year ago, last September actually, and we embed Black professionals and allies in the classroom from K through 12, and we deliver hands-on STEM learnings with emerging technology, so drones, BeagleBones, microcontrollers, artificial intelligence. And then we work with the parents to assure that they reinforce the learning at home. So here is Desmond, Desi. He is working with a DC power supply for his drone circuit that he's built. So he's actually learning Ohm's law. So voltage is equal current times resistance. So we're giving like an applied intro to algebra, physics, and electrical engineering through an immersive experience. Then here's Christian. Christian's a PhD student at Berkeley, the undergraduate in Yale. And he's giving a talk about bioluminescence inside with the group. And we work with the Black Graduate Society at UC Berkeley to give guest lectures to keep it, refreshing and engaging for the students. And we have this fun fact and working a joke that every time we invite someone to give a guest lecture, something happens in real life. So when he gave this lecture, this presentation, the California beaches at night were lit up with bioluminescent waves. We also had Bria, who did a water filtration lecture, and Alameda County actually had to shut down their water due to health concerns around the same time. And that was a few months after Flint, Michigan. And we even had Reagan, who came in and did a talk about AQI, so air quality index. And then the next month, we had to stop the chapter from continuing because the Mendocino wildfire happened and all these kids were wearing masks. So I told them we got a clause inside of our relationship where they're not allowed to bring any nuclear engineers or anything because we don't know what will happen if they bring one. But here's Cam. He's teaching Amir how to fly a quadricopter. And he also founded his own ed tech firm with targeting drone education for K through 12. So not only is this environment, this system through NSBE, we're able to, teach students, but we're also creating jobs, innovative jobs where we're able to address our community's concerns, right? And then we keep the parents engaged because they get involved with adding the culture to the environment. So they have a collective say on how their kids learn and what environment they want to foster inside this cohort. So here's a shot from our Black History Month where we were doing a book exchange at the table. So this is all great stuff. And then that Rona happened. COVID just hit us after everything that we were building up to. And the remainder of this talk is an asterisk because we're living through COVID every day as COVID-19 is still very much a threat. And California is actually seeing a spike. So in addition to everything that's going on prior to COVID, kids in education, in the education system, they were already dealing with a pretty hectic cycle of news stories. So here you can see California judge blocks Betsy DeVos from withholding relief money from undocumented students. So that's Betsy DeVos. She's the U.S. Secretary of Education. She's looking to withhold relief money for undocumented students, which is directly represented here in California for our Latinx community. There were more mass shootings than days in 2019 here in the US, and school shootings are very much a thing. A Texas teen was banned by high school from attending graduation after refusing to cut their dreadlocks, which to me, I have twist locks in my hair right now, so I couldn't even imagine being banned from school and that scenario. So video shows here's another headline. Video shows Florida school deputy grabbing middle school girl by her headscarf and he was fired. These are all headlines in the past 2 years. Just to show you the magnitude of kind of racial distress that some of the students are going through on a daily life. And this last one, DeVos demands public schools share pandemic aid with private institutions. This one was too easy to debunk, so I had to share it with you guys. So private institutions, private schools, 1 in 10 students in the US go to a private school. You can see that here. And then about 70% of the students identify as white. So it's pretty just blatant with the data. It just shows who you're targeting when you make statements like that after all of this, you know. So for NSBE, we had to make a transition as well. And we transitioned from something that was engaging and in person to something that was virtual relatively quickly, because we were already doing some partial virtualization of our program. And in the first year, we went from, I think Azaria here kind of shows it, went from super engaged to, you can see some of the students here like just defeated, like, I don't want to be on this. I've been looking at a screen for the past five days straight. I don't want to do this on my Saturday. So we're seeing engagement tank, and that's actually something that all teachers are facing in this space. So here are some of the post-COVID questions that we're still trying to address, that we're still trying to solve right now. So prior to COVID, you know, having a laptop in middle school was a privilege to some Black communities. Now it's a requirement. So do students have reliable devices and internet connections? We're hearing stories about students having to drive to McDonald's, having to drive to libraries, which were closed during quarantine, just to submit their assignments for their classes. Can we keep engagement in the classroom? How do we prevent child burnout and keep them driven inside the cohort? This is something that both education and our nonprofits are trying to figure out. Is the child's home a safe place for fostering learning? Are they surrounded by something that can foster a learning atmosphere? Some students rely on school for providing breakfast, for food. So we don't even know what they may be facing inside their own homes. And how do we account for disabilities virtually? How do we account for mental disabilities virtually? And there are some companies who are attempting to tackle these questions in real time. So Google expanded their free Google Hangouts to 250 students, which was great because that's the freemium. Now we can host Google Classroom Hangouts for free. You have Docebo, which is what we use for AI4ALL, which provides open learning and modular learning, and they're making it more accessible. Duolingo, which I use pretty daily, now teaches ABCs to students who are supposed to be in preschool. Real Talk is another great example. They're looking to connect with students who are facing mental trauma and illness, or frustration and distress during this time. So right now, there's really a call to action for solving these problems, because directly we're seeing such a shift in how education is being conducted. And I had a conversation with one of the school district teachers that we work with, and she was mentioning that they're actually starting to think about, hey, should we have two different courses or two different swim lanes, where swim lane A students would attend high school from Monday and Wednesday, and then swim lane B, they would attend Tuesday and Thursday, and then they would be virtual on different days. They still have to go through the same program, but how does a high school student manage to keep engaged in a virtual learning? They're just testing out the idea, but again, this is all experimental. So we're coming to a close, and I'm hoping that just the takeaway from this is really, here's a punchline essentially, is to support nonprofits financially or partner with them who are tackling education. Offer your skills. So if you are an engineer, if you're a lawyer, if you're a financial advisor, join a board, help them rebuild K through 12 education right now. It's a prime time to really do this. Engineers, maybe we don't need another JavaScript framework for a little bit, or a Kubernetes tool. Let's solve this problem first. And companies, continue to improve your virtualization. Finally, just disrupt the ed system and make sure you're disrupting it with ed tech, and then challenge the standardization of testing and courses to academic success. Challenge degrees from top institutes, because what did 2019 show us? That you can actually do a quid pro quo to attend, to be admitted potentially, and challenge IQ and those monikers. And finally, stay engaged with the space, because tomorrow's generation starts in the classroom. So this is how we really build a environment of what we want to see from tomorrow's generation.
And thank you, Nate, for this. And people ask all the time, what can you do to help? Nate just got a beautiful slide to show it. Thank you so much for this talk.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, awesome.